Good morning, Grade 2, and welcome to the 2019-2020 school year. My name is Melissa Trimble, and I am one of the curriculum and instruction specialists here for the Davenport schools, overseeing the areas of science and social studies. My goal in this short screencast today is to give you a brief overview of what we can expect in those two content areas for the upcoming school year. To start, I want to assure everybody that the reporting standards for both science and social studies are going to be the exact same as they were last year. Full disclosure, we did end up moving the standards to different quarters because we had to add some components into science with Project Lead the Way launch. But just know that content-wise, your life is going to be the exact same this year as it was in prior years. What you'll notice on your daily schedule is instead of just the time frame as science and social studies, it's now called science, social studies, and connections. We did put out some information at the end of last school year about connections, but just to review, connections is that designated time that we're giving people to get all of the extra things done that we give you to do with your students on a weekly or monthly or yearly basis. We do provide some guidance on what to do during this connections timeframe in the form of a must-do and can-do list, and I'll show you that in just a little bit. So for those of you that are in a building that has 3 sections of Grade 2, this is going to mean that you're going to designate a science teacher and a social studies teacher, and that third teacher in your trio is going to be designated as the connections teacher. For those buildings that have either 2 or 4 sections of Grade 2, first I need you to think that a 4-section building is just simply two sections. And then what's going to happen there is you're going to have a designated science teacher and a designated social studies teacher, and each of those teachers is going to do connections with their own class either once a week or blocked in as kind of a third time frame. I know that doesn't make much sense to you now, but in 2 more slides, I'll be able to go a little bit more in depth as I give you a concrete example of what I mean. So let me first speak to our 3-section buildings. This is what your quarter 1 is going to look like. We're giving you time on days 1 through 10 to cover just procedures with your students. And this can be just general procedures that you need to do for classroom procedures, building procedures, whatever your students need a little bit more time, energy, and effort on. That said, if your team feels like you don't need all 10 days for those procedures, please go ahead and start the rotations at any point in time. Then all I did for the remaining rotations was I took the rest of the quarter and I divided it as best I could into 3 equal parts. I know that I'm being very idealistic by saying this is a perfect 45-day quarter, so you might need to adjust a little bit on both ends, but the moral of the story being just make sure that those rotation timeframes are as equal as you can make them. For the rest of your year then, in quarters 2, 3, and 4, you're simply going to take the whole quarter, divide it up into 3, and then that gives you your 3 different rotations. Now for our 2 and 4 section buildings, there are, as I mentioned 2 slides ago, 2 different options that you can consider. Option 1 and option 2 both have that procedures 10-day time frame that you can use. Again, you don't need to use all 10 days. As soon as your team decides your students are ready to go on, you can absolutely start rotations. In the top option, you'll notice that I took the remaining days left in the quarter and I divided it into 2. Because you only have a science teacher and a social studies teacher, or in a 4-section building, 2 science teachers and 2 social studies teachers. So you would need just 2 rotations, and in that option, you're going to be doing connections once a week. The second option, after you finish your procedures time, you'll see what I've done is I've chunked up the rest of the quarter into 3 equal sections, much like I did with the 3-section buildings. But this one takes a little bit more explanation so that you can kind of see what's going to happen. In days 11 through 22, the science teacher is going to be teaching science and the social studies teacher is going to be teaching social studies, but they're going to be doing so with each other's class. In days 23 through 34 then, the science teacher will be doing connections, while the social studies teacher teaches social studies to their own class. And then on days 35 through 45, the science teacher teaches science with their own class, and the social studies teacher teaches connections to their own class. I know this second option is a little bit more involved, and you might wonder why I even am presenting it to you, but I do have a purpose behind this. When the computer science launch module needs to get done, remember that's the one that's the push in by the teacher librarian. This blocked time frame is actually going to serve that better because your kids are going to be able to do the computer science launch lessons daily and finish all together rather than have to do these lessons once a week. It's just easier on your schedule, it's easier on the teacher librarian's schedule, and I think that the kids being able to do the lessons daily are going to get more out of the experience than if they would have to remember what they did a week at a time. For the rest of the school year then, quarters 2, 3, and 4, you'll notice the only thing missing from the left-hand side to the right-hand side is that procedures time frame. And know this as well. You can choose either option, but it doesn't have to be consistent. If you want to use the blocked option, option 2, for the quarter that you do the computer science launch module, that's completely fine. And then say your team wants to do option 1 for the rest of the year, also fine. You can mix and match between these two options as you see fit, with again my recommendation being that you use option 2 during that computer science launch module push-in time by the teacher librarian. This is just another visual of what I was discussing. Please note if you are a 2 or 4 section building, the information on this particular diagram is for the first option outlined that we just got done discussing. I don't have this slide worked up for the second option, but I'm happy to do so. Just let me know that you need that information. Just a few other things about this visual. First, please notice that teacher 1, if they are the designated science teacher, they are not going to start the rotations with their own class. In fact, they're going to do the other 2 classes, and then they're going to end the quarter with their own class. This is the same thing that I want to have happen for social studies as well as for connections. This was very purposeful because we want the students to get used to the idea of transitioning to a different teacher for some learning during this time frame, and then end the quarter with their own teacher rather than start with their own teacher and then transition later in the quarter to a different person. Also notice down here for connections, if you're going to schedule the connections once a week and use option 1 for 1 or more of your quarters, we're asking that each 2 teacher team choose a different day of the week for their connections time. This is in case you need to have a push-in lesson by a counselor. They can actually get to all of the different classes within a week's time frame instead of having to come back for multiple weeks to finish the tasks that they need to do with your students. To speak very briefly of which standards are going to be covered in what quarters, science starts off the exact same as we did last year with the dispersing seeds and pollinating plants standard followed by the habitat standard. Quarter 3 is when we are going to insert the Project Lead the Way launch module called Changing Earth. This launch module will be done in place of the lessons that we wrote for the standards with Earth and Space Science. These lessons that we wrote, though, you can do them if you have time to do them, or if you have a situation where you need a student to have one more chance to show proficiency before you report out on the report card. So they're available to be used, but the must-do for quarter 3 is going to be that Project Lead the Way launch module. We'll finish out the year then with our physical science standards, which is the matter unit, and then all of those investigations on heating and cooling and reversible and irreversible reactions. For the social studies designated teachers in the room, again, notice that these standards have not changed as far as the ones that we covered last year. They just now may appear in a different quarter. As with the science standards that we saw on the last 2 slides, the verbiage that you read here and on the pacing guide that I'll show you how to get to is the exact same language as you will see on the report card for grade 2. Also, it's important to note that the standards will be additive throughout the year. which means that in quarter one, you'll just see the quarter one standards. In quarter two, you'll see quarters 1 and 2, and so on until you get to the end of the year where all the standards will be on the report card. With connections then, you'll notice that we gave you the must-dos up at the top. So for quarter one, your must-dos are digital citizenship, to do that one-day prep for the study trip, as well as some handwriting. Quarter two then is when you'll do the computer science launch module, which again is the push-in by the teacher librarian, as well as some handwriting lessons. And quarters 3 and 4 will focus on health and nutrition lessons and financial literacy. Throughout the year, we're asking you to focus on also the typing program, as well as expect some push-in counselor lessons. At the bottom of the page are just some sample schedules. Notice that we maximize the time frame of 45 minutes. So if you have a digital citizenship lesson that only takes 30 minutes, please fill the remaining time with something like handwriting. And you'll notice that in both quarter one and quarter two sample schedules, there are some pieces that we added in there, like the prep for grade 2 study trip and the A math assessment. Since it's just a sample schedule, it doesn't have to be on day 10 that you do the prep for grade 2 study trip. You could do that on day 15. You could do that on day 5. You could do the A math assessment on day 7, on day 14. These pieces are yours to move around. To find all of the scope and sequence documents, you want to first go to the S-bar page. Then click on Elementary, Grade 2, on Science or Social Studies, and finally on that scope and sequence link that you'll find underneath either Science or Social Studies, which will open up a file that looks like this. Notice that we have 3 separate links for Grade 2 Social Studies, Grade 2 Science, and Grade 2 Connections. If I hover over one of those, you'll notice a link appears above, and when I click on that, you will see exactly what I had shown you on the prior screens, which is your scope and sequence. If you hover over the Back to Homepage link and then click on that, it takes you right back to this front page. Grade 2 Science quickly, if I hover and click on that one, takes you to that scope and sequence. Again, it's exactly as I just got done showing you in the presentation. What I want to point out also is on this main table of contents page is also the Connections must do and can do list. Again, note that on Connections we have already scheduled in your must do's, but this is where you can find the list of can do's. Now this list is by no means exhaustive. Perhaps you have an idea that isn't listed on this slide. I would have a conversation with your building principal before you do any can-dos that are not listed on here, and be ready to provide evidence that you are indeed on track with all of your must-dos while you're having that conversation about the unique can-do that you want to do with your students. Wrapping up our presentation this morning then, just a few odds and ends to mention. First, for the Grade 2 Science teachers, we will be training you on Project Lead the Way during the October in-service day. It's going to be a full, intense day of learning, but by the end of the day, you'll be more than ready to engage in that Project Lead the Way launch module during quarter 3 with your students. On the social studies side of things, TCI will again be available this year as a resource. Please be on the lookout for an email from me with the login and password to be able to access TCI online. And as I mentioned, the report card language will mirror that you see on the scope and sequence file, and each quarter's standards will be added to the report card as we go throughout the year. We are finalizing the WOPSI study trip dates for this year, which we're trying to get back in our fall timeframe of September and October. Stay tuned for more details as soon as I know them. And in addition to emailing you, I will also be posting them to the Great Mind Study Trips Google site. There's the tiny URL for you to access that. And whereas I have thoroughly enjoyed my time with social studies over the past 2 years, this area of oversight is being handed off to my colleague Michelle Harvey. I will remain your point of contact for science, and I can still be a point of contact for social studies as we transition during the quarter 1 timeframe. If you have any questions or need clarification on things, I have created a Padlet for you to post them on. If you're new to Padlet, don't worry. Go to the tiny URL, and the instructions of how to use a Padlet are actually on the Padlet. I want to wish you all a wonderful school year ahead and have a great rest of your day.